Welcome back to yet another episode of Weird Yu-Gi-Oh! Card Effects. This is episode 7. I have a playlist on my channel of the previous 6 episodes, and also make sure to subscribe if you want to see more of this series. I enjoy making it quite a bit. Today's theme is going to be cards that are commonly misread by a lot of players. We're not really going to do a lot of comparing and contrasting with old printings versus new printings. These are all cards that even right now people still get confused about, whether or not they've gotten reprints or whatever. That part doesn't really matter. It's just cards that when people read them for the first time, sometimes they miss one or two very important parts. First up, we have non-aggression area, a very old school card here. This one was only printed in 2003 and 2005, so it's been about 15 years since a lot of people have even seen this card, but a lot of people misread it, and I mean a lot. I remember this card back in the day, people were always getting confused about what it actually does. So here's the most recent printing of non-aggression area. It is a normal trap card that simply says you can only activate this card during your standby phase, discard one card from your hand. Your opponent cannot normal summon, set, and or special summon during his or her next turn. Admittedly, this card is not super complicated, and obviously I'm reading it right to you guys, so you're not going to miss any of the words. But one word that a lot of people miss when they first read this card is the your standby phase part. A lot of people think it just says the standby phase, and that's not how it works. And the reason that that is a huge difference is that this card without a doubt would be broken beyond belief if it read the standby phase instead of your standby phase, because then you could set the card and on your opponent's turn you could immediately use it on their standby phase, pretty much skip their entire turn. This card would be insanely overpowered. As it stands right now though, it's way too slow. You have to set it on your turn, wait for your opponent's turn, and then once your next standby phase finally happens, then you can use this card to hinder your opponent on their next turn. It sort of has the same problem as Time Seal, but a lot of people miss that when they first read this card. I've seen plenty of people try to put this card in their deck and get really confused about why they can't activate it on their opponent's very first standby phase. Next up, we have Penalty Game, and I don't know if it's because I play decks like Altergeist and Frogs and other trap-based strategies, but this is probably the one that I get asked about the most out of all the cards in today's video. Penalty Game is not a very good card, but a lot of people miss the reason why. This is an older trap card. It does have a more recent printing. Luckily, it does have problem-solving card text, so we're going to look at the most recent version of this card and see what it has to say. When your opponent has 4 cards in their hand, activate one of these effects. Your opponent cannot draw during the next draw phase, or your opponent cannot activate spell or trap cards this turn. Almost every single time that I've mentioned wanting to have more outs to evenly matched or lightning storm or whatever, I've gotten at least one comment from someone saying, why don't you try out Penalty Game? It's basically a cold wave in a trap card form. Here's the thing, I know that this card does not say exactly 4 cards in their hand, but that's what it means. Your opponent does not have to have at least 4 cards, they have to have exactly 4 cards. Now I don't know why some Yu-Gi-Oh cards say exactly and then the number and why some don't, like this one, but as it stands right now and as it always has been, Penalty Game does in fact require your opponent to have exactly 4 cards in their hand to use either one of the effects. And this does make it pretty bad, because if you go first, which is when you would want to have this card, your opponent is probably going to have 6 cards when they start their first turn, because they draw one for turn and they already had 5. That makes Penalty Game useless until your opponent plays 2 cards, and honestly, if you're playing a back row based deck and your opponent has cards like Evenly Matched or Lightning Storm, they're going to use them first, or at least second, because they want to use those cards before you negate all of their attempts at summoning monsters or activating effects or whatever. So Penalty Game is pretty bad against cards like that. Maybe it has potential even with this knowledge of how the card actually works, even knowing that your opponent has to have exactly 4 cards in their hand. Maybe I suppose you could use it against some matchups, you know, maybe they hand trap you so they only have 5 cards and they play 1 card and you skip all of their spells and traps for that turn, but realistically it's just not flexible enough to actually see competitive play in its current state. Still a very commonly misread card, which is why I wanted to talk about it in today's video. I promise this video is not only trap cards, cards, but next up we have Solemn Judgment, a very old school counter trap card. Honestly, pretty much all of these Solemn cards have been misread at some point. I have had so many judges called on me for disputing how the Solemns work at regionals and sometimes YCSs, but Solemn Judgment is the one that confuses the most amount of people. This is a counter trap card that currently says when a monster would be summoned or a spell/trap card is activated, pay half your life points, negate the summon or activation, and if you do, destroy that card. So how is this confusing? How are people misreading this card? Well, on one hand, you have a lot of people that think that this thing can negate monster effects, which is absolutely not true. And on the other hand, you have people that think it can negate spell and trap effects, which also is not true. The confusion here, of course, is because Solemn Strike does negate monster effects, and Solemn Warning can sometimes negate spells or traps if they are attempting to special summon a monster. So all three of those popular Solemns, as well as all the other Solemns, have very specific things that they work against and things that they don't work against, and it's really important to read them carefully to truly understand what they actually can be used against. Moving on to a monster card, let's talk about Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit. Now I know many of the Ghost Girl hand traps have been misread throughout history, but this one in particular really does take the cake in my mind because so many people don't understand how this card works in more than one way. So the current text on Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit says this: when a monster on the field activates its effect, or when a spell/trap that is already face up on the field activates its effect, quick effect, you can send this card from your hand or field to the graveyard, destroy that card on the field. You can only use this effect of Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit once per turn. Here's the two areas where people really get confused with Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit. First off, this card inherently does not negate any effects, it only destroys the card. A lot of people do miss that, and there are some cases where the effect will no longer resolve, but inherently there's nothing on Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit that prevents the effect from working. Where this gets people mixed up is people will use Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit on cards like Alistair the Invoker or Elemental Hero Stratos, thinking that it destroys the card and negates the effect, like a much better Ash Blossom, but that's not what it says. Of course, there are some important cases where using a Ghost Ogre on a monster effect will prevent that effect from resolving properly. For example, against Guard Dragon monsters, they have to special summon dragons to where they point, and if you Ghost Ogre them, well, now they no longer point anywhere, so you can't special summon dragons. Another example would be like Mech Knight Blue Sky, which has to check the cards in the same column as itself, so if you Ghost Ogre it, now it's no longer in a column, so it can't check anymore. The second area where people get really confused about Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit is how it's used against spells and traps. No, you can't just Ghost Ogre a Rhoda or a Dark Hole or a Regeki to negate the effect. Ghost Ogre can only be used on spells and traps that are already face up on the field. This means you can't Ghost Ogre when your opponent first activates a spell or trap, because it already has to be face up on the field if you're trying to Ogre it. For example, against Union Hanger, you can't Ghost Ogre the Searching effect because that happens when the card is first activated, so it's not already face up on the field, but you could theoretically Ghost Ogre the Equipping effect because at that point the card is already face up. This is a combination of people misreading the card and also not understanding how the rules work, so I understand how this effect can be confusing. There is a lot more to Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit than I can possibly cover in one section of one video, but hopefully that gives you a basic outline of how the card works and how people might misread it. I'll also mention Santa Claus here. So this is a card that I actually have talked about in the past. It is one of the most commonly misread cards in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! Right alongside Silent Wabi, which has a very similar effect. A lot of people when they first read this card think it's a better kaiju. It's a kaiju that gives you a free card, but that's not quite what it does. Santa Claus is a Fiend level 6 monster that says you can special summon this card from your hand to your opponent's side of the field in defense position by attributing one monster they control. If summoned this way during the end phase of this turn, you can draw one card. Where is the confusion here? Well, the confusion here is that there are two different sentences here, the special summoning and the drawing effect in the end phase. This means that when you're doing the special summoning, you're only reading that sentence. That is all you're doing. The person who gets the draw is the person that actually got the Santa Claus when it was summoned, not the person doing the summoning in the first place, which means just like the real Santa Claus, this one gives your opponent a free gift, in this case an extra draw. And finally, do I even have to say it? Every single one of Obelisk, Ra, and Slifer's effects have been misread at some point. I've made multiple entire videos dedicated to breaking down all the key parts of these three monsters, and I know that they are iconic, and I know that a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions about them, and I'll make sure at the end of this video to link to my favorite video that I did on their effects, just in case you guys want to know more about the Egyptian gods. The god cards are really not that confusing, but if you go in with the mindset that they are as powerful as they were in the anime, it can make things a little bit confusing because you're going to overestimate how each part of their effect actually works. Anyway though, that was episode 7 of Weird Yu-Gi-Oh! Card Effects. I really do enjoy doing this series quite a lot, and I would appreciate you guys giving me more suggestions for expanding in future episodes. I think the next one is going to be all about old school cards that remove things from play and how weird they were. So if you have any suggestions for cards that could be included in episode 8, let me know in the comment section below. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching today's video. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.